Hi, everyone, and welcome to podcast number 6. Today, my guest is Mr. Jason Gianni, who is from New Jersey. Jason has a master's in music from Penn State and an undergrad in jazz from the University of Delaware. He was the drummer for the SpongeBob SquarePants theme song, and he also did some work for the Disney Channel for Hannah Montana show. He has been a teacher at the Collective in New York City for the past 13 years, and he is also the head of the drum department at the University of Arts in Philadelphia. Last but not least, Jason was the drummer for the Ultimate Queen celebration for the past 2.5 years and traveled around the world with Marc Martel, who did a lot of the work for the movie Bohemian Rhapsody. So before we get started on the podcast today, I thought I'd share a little bit of Jason's amazing drum work here. So enjoy, and thanks for joining us today. Jason Gianni, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be on with you, man.
Yeah, this is a real treat for me. I remember just before you kind of get started and dig into your background a little bit. I remember when we met in Chicago when you were touring with Queen, and Phil Trocchio, introduced us. I'm like, this guy's really cool. He's like a little short Italian like I am. He's kind of a wild man, and he's just a lot of fun. And then we got a chance to reconnect again last summer when the Queen tour came through, and we got to hang out a little bit and go have some tacos afterwards. That was
amazing. That place was great too, wasn't it?
I know it's so good. So
it's great.
Anyway, so you I've done my homework on you and tried to find out a little bit more about you other than your impressive drumming that I've seen and just knowing you for the short time that I have over the last year.
Right.
But you grew up in Jersey. What was that like, and your childhood and kind of early influences?
Yeah, well, I'm here now again. I'm actually in the town that I grew up in. It's Livingston, New Jersey, which is in northern Jersey, about 20 miles outside of New York City. Mom and dad grew up around the same area in the town next to here. And so did my mother's parents as well. But my father's parents were from Italy, southern Italy and Sicily. So I'm a second generation Italian from there. Growing up in Jersey is great. I love Jersey. Jersey gets a bad rap because everybody just sees the turnpike, and that's all they judge. They say, "Oh, this state's a bunch of crap." And actually, it's a really beautiful state. We live on the west side of what's called the South Mountain Range, and once you get in that area, you start to get to the farmland and the streams and the mountains and stuff, and it's just really beautiful. Went to all through the normal schools. Our school systems are great in Jersey. In fact, Jersey's now ranked, I think, in the top 5 out of the whole country.
Wow.
And our town is, I think, in the top 5 of all Jersey. So we're very lucky. And now my daughter goes there, so I'm very happy to have a real good school system for her. I grew up, very, very normal. The mom and dad household. Kind of mom was sort of a stay-at-home housewife. Dad worked on the floor of the stock exchange for about 25 years. So he was a business guy. Played bass, but a hobbyist. I really didn't have many musicians in my my family. Not much of a very eventful childhood. Good childhood, all kind of cool. Got into music in my teens and went on from there.
Well, so what was that like? What was your first influence, and what sort of drew you to music and specifically drums?
Well, actually, I spoke a little bit too fast. Like a lot of drummers, I grew up doing the pots and pans when I was 3 years old and leading the little nursery school parades with the little toy drum, that sort of thing. But at the time, I really didn't know this was something that I wanted. I mean, you speak to a lot of drummers who got started when they were like 3 or 4 years old, and they're like, yeah, they were playing as kids. I didn't quite get a hop on that right away. I was actually into a lot of sports growing up. Played a lot of soccer, baseball, and hockey, and always loved music. Around 9, I started actually picking up piano, and I was doing it all by ear. And my cousin is a classical pianist, and he's the only musician in our family. And he said to my mom, "This kid's got some talent. He's got like a pitch thing. He's picking stuff off the radio, and I'm listening to MTV, pulling stuff off." And my mom is going, "How are you doing that?" I'm like, "I don't know, And then a friend of mine was carrying a drum pad around with him through school in 6th grade, and I'm like, "Yeah, I want to do that." And it just kind of popped in my head. But music was always a part of our lives. Mom and Dad were huge music fans. You know, lots and lots of like Motown early on, early rock and roll Beatles, Zeppelin, you know, that type of stuff. And then I sort of started to find my own once like the ears started kicking in. You know, when I was 9 or 10, MTV started. So it was like that early great days of MTV. So I started finding influences and artists I liked. And then that's when things really started to take off.
Yeah, it's amazing when I talk to people in musicians, you know, that a lot of it, their inspiration came from their parents and stuff that they listened to and stuff that they saw. And as kids, I think we tend to mock things. And I remember, you know, my influence with drums is when I was 10 years old, my parents took us to Disneyland, and, you know, they had that little pop-up thing, you know.
Oh
In
yeah, I
Tomorrowland.
saw the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I saw Buddy Rich play, and I was like, "Oh my
Oh,
God, look at these drums!" And I was just so completely blown away by that. And when we got back to Chicago, where, you know, I grew up, my parents rented me this little Slingerland drum for the week, and I still to this day I can't read a note of music, but I can play. And it's like I think there's something to be said about that. You know, you're not a savant so much, but you have those natural abilities to do that. And then you know, I had Tupperware that I banged on because
yeah.
my parents were like, they're not going to buy me a drum kit. I think the neighbor kid had a drum kit, one of those little toy ones. And I just, you know, I pounded the heads right off of it because there was nothing to it. And I was always a really hard hitter like you are. But that was
Yeah.
fun how that, you know, those influences are so important.
Oh yeah, I actually set up when Thriller came out, and I heard "Want to Be Starting Something" for the first time. I said, "There's this like that sound," and I set up a wicker basket that held my parents' fire logs, and I had like a drum pad, and I was using that as the sound. And my parents were like, "How are you doing this?" I was like 10. I don't know. I don't know. You know?
That's brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, and I started playing on a leather chair. I was playing Photograph by Def Leppard on a leather chair and stuff. You know, it was just stuff all just sort of kind of came in. I still hadn't really found myself yet, really solidified the idea of taking official lessons and being into certain bands, but it was all sort of coming together around then, you know.
Yeah. And so then, did you play like in any you know, kind of childhood bands? Like, did you have friends that you used to jam with and just kind of play music?
Yeah, that all started coming together when I was about 13. And I met some of my best friends still to this day, and we formed our high school band. And we had a couple of different versions and people that were in the band, but by the time we got to like later years in high school, we had like the band that we wanted to play in. And yeah, I mean, we all started to kind of pick up the same influences and play the same stuff that we were really interested in, which was all, you know, sort of more of a progressive style, and, you know, bands that were a little bit more musician oriented. And all the guys that I was in the band with had all these chops and stuff. So here we are in high school playing, you know, YYZ, you know, from Rush, and all this Kansas stuff and Boston stuff and all these harmonies. And everyone's like, "How are you guys doing that?" I don't know. You know, this is just what we're listening to, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a good time because I think it was fun to have friends who had the same influences too, and you sort of discovered things together, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the difficult thing about being a drummer is that you're not playing music. You're laying down a rhythm and a beat, and unless you can imagine music in your head, or you have to play along with something. It's not like a guitar or a piano where you're actually playing a song and reproducing it or coming up with something on your own. You just have to, you get your chops going, and that's, you know, it's not music, it's rhythm, you know? And I think that's what
Well,
makes it a little challenging sometimes.
I think you're right, but I started on piano and I still play piano. I mean, there's still a keyboard next to me right here, and I always, even to this day, whenever I heard a song that I liked, I would always go to the piano first. I would try to figure out the chords, figure out the movement, figure out the harmony, the theory behind it, and now I write quite a bit. So that's been kind of like the whole, you know, building process up to this point. Is that's how I started. So for me, that's how I balanced it out, so that I didn't just play rhythms and just banged on a bunch of surfaces. I really knew about the theory behind it. I knew about harmonies. I knew about singing. I knew about, you know, music form and all that type of stuff. And this was even before I really officially started to study in college. So I thank my earlier days for that, in that I got into piano first before drums.
Yeah. Well, that's important that I mean, let's talk about that. You went to school, you have a lot of degrees. I've seen you've got
Mm.
masters in 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 things in minors and music history and all that kind of stuff. I'd imagine you studied. So what was it like for you going to college and started really digging into music and learning on it in
Yeah.
the level than just sort of banging around and playing with your friends?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I always knew I wanted to do it, and Dad was sort of an old-fashioned type of guy, saying, if you want to do it, you got to really do it the right way. And I always felt, very similar in that respect. Like you got to kind of follow the rules, and I never quite understood why. I mean, I do now a little bit more for like image reasons and things like that. Why musicians are so wealthy and get exposed and get popular without studying their instrument. I wouldn't think to trust a lawyer or a doctor if that was the case. If I went to see a doctor and he's like, "Yeah, I got my license from a gumball machine or something,"
I just sort of picked this up on the side.
what is this, scalpel?
I have a knack for knives.
Yeah, right. So I always kind of felt like I wanted to do it the right way, and it actually is kind of a sort of a left turn. Not only did I go to college for all the specific degrees, but I also went for orchestral percussion. So I actually wasn't specifically studying drum set for 6 years. I was studying mallets, marimba, vibes, timpani, all the classical stuff. And then I have a minor in jazz. And then I ended up, when I went to masters so I went undergrad at University of Delaware and masters at Penn State. And when I went to Penn State, I had an assistantship in which I actually was the drum set teacher there for 2 years while I was getting my master's degree in orchestral percussion.
Yeah. Well, I think is great is not only are you educated, but you're an educator, which
Mm-hmm.
is important. I mean, I've seen a lot of the things that you're doing now with drummers, the Drummers Collective and the Drummers Bible and commercial work, which I'll get into that later because I want to hear about your like when you moved from
Yep.
the East Coast to the West Coast.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I was always a fan of a couple of drummers in the industry who were well known for their playing, but also had that finger in the teaching thing too. And everything sort of started coming together and colliding together. I had taught since high school, but it wasn't really until college, and then especially my graduate degree, that I really started to get involved in like actual specific real teaching of being a professor in the guide in the college handbook, and really having a regular amount of students every week and stuff. And I really started to enjoy the teaching. I wanted to initially model myself off of the guys that I was just saying, like someone like Steve Smith from Journey, was the type
Great
of guy
guy.
who would go, yeah, I mean, one of my favorite, and also a very, very good friend, great guy. He would go out on the road for 6 weeks at a time, and then come back and teach for 3 weeks. And people would hit him up, and he'd be teaching, and then he'd go back out on the road. And that was kind of my original model. But I wasn't really one of the lucky ones that got that gig early on. So the earlier part of my career, when I was really paying my dues, was all developing my teaching skills and really continuing the education thing and getting into really hardcore parts of teaching, which is great because now that I'm at the college level of teaching, I really have honed my craft. And it took those years to really hone my craft and get better and practice teaching. You can't really just go out and teach. There are a lot of really bad teachers out there. So I've had to really work on it to be able to judge exactly what's good for the person that comes to see me. And so I've gotten used to that. And I think that's one of my strengths, is being able to like see someone like yourself and you sit down and plan and go, I know exactly what you need. Boom, let's do it. That sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's discernment, what you're talking about there, and that's something that not everybody has. There's that old saying that those that do, and those that don't teach. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of really great teachers out there, but the fact that you are a player and an educator, that's a gift, man, and it's definitely something that you've worked hard at, and you're seeing some great results from that. Knowing where somebody needs help or where you can guide them, because as someone that, I don't know how you are, but I'm dyslexic. And so it's really hard for me to think in a linear fashion. I kind of bounce all over the place. So that I'm very mindful of that when I'm trying to help somebody, that I don't put the cart before the horse, because I have ideas that come to me all day long, and the creativity sometimes overrides your common sense.
Yeah.
Well, no, the first gear, and then second gear, and then third gear. And I'm like, wow, look what this backlight can do. And they're like, what's a backlight? And so,
Yeah.
so
One thing at a time.
yeah, one thing at a time there.
Yeah. I've to kind of piggyback on what you're saying, I've had a lot of, I'm not dyslexic or have any sort of issues like that, but I have had, I'm the person you go to that has had to pay his dues from the beginning. You know, I've done everything myself. I never had anybody help me. I didn't have anybody in my family in the business. So I learned a lot through my whole process. So one of the things I've gotten real good at, which is sort of something you were saying with like the whole putting things in order, is really like pulling back on my memories and being like, okay, I remember when I was developing this, this is the best way. This is the way that I learned. Either I made a lot of mistakes, so I have to correct those mistakes, or I got from this step to this step. So I'm really good at like I call it building the house when I teach. You know what I mean? Some people teach, you know, the teachers that are the ones that do and the ones that don't teach, those are the guys that go, okay, what are we doing this lesson? Where they have sort of no organization. They don't know how to read someone. You know, better teachers know about building the house, starting with the ground floor, going up from there, that sort of thing. So, but it's taken work. It's just like an instrument. You have to practice that. You have to get used to that. So that's kind of where I am right now. And you're right. I try to balance out the performance and the teaching as best as I can.
Yeah. Well, experience is the best teacher, and you can't teach something that you don't know. And, my dad always, one of the things he always said to me, which I love, and I pass this along when I teach workshops, is a calm sea never made a skillful sailor. So
Right.
sometimes people, when they get into a challenging situation, they're like, oh no, what do I do? And they freak out. It's like, that's where the learning occurs, is when you're in that uncharted territory and you're doing things that you haven't explored before. And I don't want people to tell me how to do it. Sometimes I want to figure it out myself, because like Benjamin Franklin, he said, I just figured out 10,000 ways things didn't work, and then I discovered electricity. So, gosh, the education is amazing, and you're teaching and stuff like that. I was looking at, I'm just kind of skipping around here because
Sure.
I got a lot of notes, and I think,
Yeah. Thanks.
I'm just kind of jumping around as things jump out to me. But you were a session drummer. Actually, before you say that, the session drumming, when did you get your first professional gig? When did that happen? And was that?
Well, it depends on what you define as professional, because if you're talking about like the gigging side of things, I mean, I was getting, some money in high school doing some gigs, but, small things, local things. In college, I started kind of stepping it up a little bit more, maybe playing for like big bands or some concert things, or, at one point I played Carnegie Hall, with a chorus, so yeah, it was pretty cool. Yeah, it was pretty cool. But like as far as like stuff that I really consider real professionally driven is more like, when we're going to get to when I moved to California, when I finally finished my schooling, that's really when things started to take off a little bit more.
Okay.
I was 23. I mean, I'd been gigging way before that. I've been teaching way before that. It was really one of the things I noticed is that, like, before you change to a different level of your career, before you do anything of that, sometimes you have to sort of really sink yourself into committing to like a new stage full on before things really start to take off. So it really wasn't until I'm totally done with my schooling, totally moved, totally 100% was just like, okay, this is what I'm doing now. I'm 100% drummer, musician full time. That's when things really started getting to that next level. And that was around 23 years old.
I think once you have that one job, like there's like a paradigm shift, I think, and that's kind of what you're talking about.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, doors open. I mean, you have to be in the position to let doors open too. I remember when before I moved out to California, again, we'll talk about this in just a minute, but I was pretty aggressive in making calls before I moved and wanting to send my resume to certain places, certain schools, certain places to teach, to work, to do session stuff. And everyone had the same reaction. Hey, man, sounds good. You're a young guy. Sound like you know what you're doing. Got a good degree behind you. Call us when you get out here. Everybody said the same thing. Call us when you get out here. And I did. And I went out there and things started to happen. But I needed to go there for it to happen. One thing I'll say about networking, and I still think this holds true, is that, and I'm sure we'll get to this as we go through the timeline here, but the idea of social media networking, there's still a lot to say about networking in person and speaking to someone directly and not just throwing an email out or some sort of errant video on Facebook or something like that. I think that there is an acceptance to what people are doing with social media nowadays that the older generation has to learn. But at the same time, I think the newer generation has to learn the power in talking to somebody directly, calling them, showing up at their door. I remember when, again, we haven't quite gotten to the actual move yet, but when I did get to California and started to work on networking and marketing myself, I would go to people's studios. I would go to their doors and hand them a press pack, and they'd be like, "I'm so impressed. I don't know who you are, but I'm impressed that I get to meet someone." Because so many people are just like, email, "Hey, what's up?" I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
So I still believe in that old-fashioned way.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I mean, the human touch factor is really a long lost art, and it's too easy and convenient to go like, like when you're sitting or wherever, and it's like, you're eventually going to have to talk to somebody. You're eventually going to have to interact with that person, and you have to be able to have some, they call it EQ over IQ. It's like emotional quotient. Your activity, your ability to navigate through conflict and to be able to communicate things and to be able to interact, and it's the whole give and take. But yeah, I totally agree with you. So, well, let's jump into your move to California. We're already sort of circling the wagons right now.
We're already in there anyway. Yeah. So actually, I have no plans to move to California. My wife, we were dating at the time, and she got an offer to get her master's degree. So I had just finished up my master's degree, and she got an offer to do her master's degree in photojournalism out at the Academy of Art in San Francisco. And if I was going to move to California, I would move to LA. I had no interest in moving to San Francisco. I like the city, but I just had no interest. But she kind of gave me a little bit of an ultimatum. Either we're going to move there and start a life together, or we're going to break up. And my mother said to me, "Honey, I love you and I'm going to miss you. Get the hell out of the house," kind of thing. All right, okay. Yeah. So a couple tears, her packing up, and we left and drove and everything. So we went. And actually, the initial plan was just to stay out there until she went to finish school. And I would just kind of get my feet wet, see what the professional life was and all that sort of stuff. And it ended up turning into 10 years. It wasn't 10 years of time that I loved. It wasn't really for me, but it was one of those things. I'm a very committed person and very loyal to jobs that I work in and people that I connect with and so on and so forth. So it was not easy for me to cut ties with certain things. And I'm the type of person that likes to commit to something and see it through for a certain amount of time. Let's just see what happens. Let's see what happens. And that's kind of what led to the 10 years. So in 1996, we moved out to San Francisco. Lived in downtown for a little while. Then eventually, about a year and a half later, moved to San Bruno. And we stayed in 2 different houses in San Bruno, which is by the airport. And stayed out there for 10 years. That was wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy. So what eventually led you to your next sort of stage after that 10 years was up?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of things that happened in those 10 years. And the 10 years out in California were, when I look back now, as much as there was a lot of struggles going on and I was really paying my dues. And those were the 10 years that I really spent just doing a lot of stuff underground, and nobody really still knew who I was. And it was very frustrating. I was watching a lot of people get breaks while I was not getting breaks and that sort of thing. That's where a lot of my session work happened, where I wrote my book, The Drummer's Bible, where I actually got signed to a band called Miggs on 33rd Street Records, which was part of Tower Records. I mean, a lot of stuff happened, but it just wasn't quite it didn't break through yet. A lot of, I call it pilot lights. I didn't have that gasoline to really throw on there, and it exploded yet, But there was a lot of stuff going on at the time where I was just like, I did this, and really helped me, kind of jump and plant seeds to the next level. So eventually, what happened was we got pregnant with our daughter, and we did not want to, I wanted to move back for a long time. I would have wanted to move back to the East Coast, but I didn't want to have our daughter without our families. My wife felt the same way. So my wife was working a job at CNET, if you remember CNET. She was the director of e-commerce for CNET for photography and retouching. And she got a very, very short window where they said, we could transfer you to the New York office. And within a month, we had our daughter. We packed up and we moved back to the East Coast like that.
Wow. So talk to me a little bit about some of this commercial work that you've done. You did some stuff for Hannah Montana and.
Yep.
and
Yeah.
SpongeBob. How does the session
Yeah.
work fit into where you were at this time of your career, and how does that all happen? Because I know a lot of people want to know, like, well, how do I get this kind of a gig? It's like photographers in a lot of ways. Like, I want to get commercial photographer, I want to do portraits, or I want to do weddings. It's like, how do you go about finding those jobs and those gigs? Did you have a manager or an agent at this time?
No, I didn't. And so there was a lot of, like you said, perfect storm. There was a lot of sort of perfect storms happening at the time that sort of led to that. One of the things is when we were talking about being aggressive and really reaching out, I actually did an old school thing where I actually picked up the yellow pages. I stuck it in my car with a pad. I went down the yellow pages and I just went to all these different places that were in the yellow pages, studios, the clubs. I went to people who owned studios that ended up being garages, in their house. I knocked on people's front doors. I went to real studios where I was like, oh, this is awesome. Oh yeah, we can't take it right now. I had the experience of a lifetime going to all these different places, and I wouldn't have experienced that by just doing it by email. I actually got in my car and knocked on doors.
Yeah.
And it just so happened I went to one studio in particular called Hank Smith Music, which ended up turning into Music Orange, where they said, we need somebody like you. You'd be great. And I said, is this like a commercial type of studio? And they said, yes, that's all we do. And I said, great. And sure enough, a week later, I got called for a gig, and it was a late night softcore porn on on Cinemax or
Oh
Showtime.
no.
Yeah, that was remember when you asked me my first gig? That technically was my first
Oh,
real
wow.
gig.
No judgment, man.
Right, exactly. So really it was through that, through the hard work of just like, I probably would have hooked up with them at some point anyway, because I knew after working in San Francisco, I knew a lot of friends who knew them and this, that, and the other thing. But still, it was really that initial knock on the door and meeting them that got me those gigs. And that was, I wrote an article about this in Modern Drummer one time where I said a rewarding thing is getting called for a job like that, but the most rewarding thing is getting called back, because you did the right thing, you did the right job. And sure enough, that's what happened. Is I did a couple gigs with them, and I just kept getting called back for different commercials, different shows, different. I did something for Bugs Life, the movie, all this type of stuff. So sure enough, I get a call one day, and the owner of the studio says, hey, we got this theme song for a cartoon to record. And the coolest thing that I thought at the time was that most of the stuff I was doing was all commercial work on TV, where you had to just sort of take the chance of it being on. So I would tell my friends back east or my family, hey, I just did this Isuzu car commercial, or this, Coca-Cola commercial, but I don't know when it's going to be on. If you see this guy in a chair and he's like, looking at fireworks in the sky, that's the commercial. Oh, I haven't seen it yet. That kind of thing. Well, sure enough, this was going to be on Nickelodeon at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays. Okay, great. Now I can tell people when I'm going to be on, So they get me to the studio, and I go, okay, what is this for? And they go, it's this new cartoon called SpongeBob SquarePants. And I said, what? And they showed us the video, and the intro video was done, and the only thing that was on music was just the bass line and click track. I had no idea what the theme song sounded like, and I see the sponge exploding. I'm like, what? I thought I was taking drugs. Like, what am I doing? Sure enough, we record it, and 6 weeks later, it's literally the biggest cartoon in the world. And it happened that fast. So, the business story about it was that musicians have questions about how to get paid for this type of stuff. So you can either get what's called a residual payment, which every 13 weeks the campaign is bought out and you get repaid again, or it's a buyout, where they give you a lump sum of money and they say, okay, we just own the track now and we can use it whatever we want. Well, this was a buyout. So in fairness, it was a buyout, but I got very little for it, and not a lot at all. And when the cartoon really took off, they gave us like a bonus, so that same amount. And about 4 years later, I'm watching TV, and sure enough, there's a cartoon for a commercial, for the first SpongeBob movie. And they're doing the theme song, and it's Avril Lavigne doing the theme song. I'm like, wow, what is going on? So I called the studio and I said, hey guys, hey man, it's like, do you know? Because the studio owner Blaze Smith wrote the song with Steven Hillenburg, who created SpongeBob. And I said, do you know that there's a SpongeBob movie coming out and Avril Lavigne is doing the theme song? And he said, no. He said, when did you see this? I said, I just saw a commercial. He goes, hold on a second, let me get back to you. So he calls ASCAP or BMI, whatever. I think it was ASCAP. And cuts back to me, and he calls me back, and he says, when was the last time you saw SpongeBob? I said, about 2 hours ago. And he said, is your drums, is our music still on there? I said, yeah, it's the same thing. And he said, here's the deal. Apparently, ASCAP has registered 2 theme songs. Not ASCAP, Viacom, who owns Nickelodeon MTV, registered 2 theme songs for SpongeBob. One is the original, and one is something they've done with it, added a different mix, added an instrument, we don't know. And they're using that anywhere they want, on any game, on anything without having to pay anyone. And I said, isn't that illegal? And he said, well, yeah, but are you going to fight Viacom? Do you have the money to fight them? I said, no. And that was kind of like a hands up in the air kind of thing. So the moral of the story is there are certain gigs that you do that are sort of your calling card, and there are other gigs that you do that have other benefits to them.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You know what? I'm so glad that you brought that up, because there's too many, I don't want to say too many, but there's this misperception that like, oh, I got to get paid for everything I do. There are certain things that you do that are more valuable than money, like opportunities to get places and to do things or to meet people at critical times. And, what your story that you just told, this is exactly the same thing that happened to Barry Manilow. Barry Manilow wrote jingles when he started his early career.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was the Band-Aid, I'm stuck on Band-Aid. The
Yeah,
other
right.
one he did was Just Like a Good Neighbor, State Farm is There. That was a buyout. State Farm is still running that
Really?
ad. 40
And he doesn't get anything
Can you
for it.
imagine
Yeah.
the residuals for him?
Yeah.
He needs the money.
It just kind of is what it is. And, if you ask my wife, she'll come in here and probably punch me in the head for how many things I did for free in the first, 10 years of my career.
Yeah.
But, to this day, I still, I offer things for free. I do things for, back end stuff. Let's see what happens with it. We all have to kind of help each other out. We're in a really, sure.
Pays off.
And we're in a really tough time now. It's, not even mentioning the COVID thing, but just everything with arts and, we all kind of just have to keep helping each other out. And I'm not going to do everything for free, but at the same time, I know a lot of people on the other end of things who are complete money shysters, and they end up not working after a while because people don't want to work with them.
Yeah.
So you got to
be said too about staying on top of your craft. Like if you're doing something and if you're sitting around, you just you go flat if you don't keep doing what you're doing. And I've been doing all kinds of stuff. I mean, this podcast is sort of part of that. I've just always had an interest in hearing about people's stories, like we were talking about earlier before we started recording. And I want to get back to SpongeBob for a second, because one of the things that I found fascinating about people that do voices for cartoons is the complete anonymity that they have. Like Michael Jordan or a big sports figure or a big actor, someone like Tom Hanks, they can't go anywhere without being recognized. And Tom, the voice for SpongeBob, I worked with him in Hollywood on a project, and we were in the recording studio, and the guy showed up in a t-shirt and his pajama bottoms and a pair of flip-flops.
Sounds right.
He recorded that little thing that we did, and then he went to Burbank and he did another gig, and I thought, this is the greatest job in the world. This guy can go anywhere. And these cartoon voices are made up. It's not like someone's going to recognize his real voice because he never uses it probably.
Yeah. One of the things I've thought of pretty regularly is if I had a different discovery path in my career, would I've done it differently? Would I wanted to do it differently? And I think there are many years that would have been a lot easier on me if I would have been discovered earlier, if I would have had a really huge gig earlier, because I struggled for many years. There were really some bad times too. But at the same time, I, personality-wise, am the type of person who would rather come home, draw the shades, and curl up in front of a fire with my 2 girls and watch a movie and not be out at the local bar partying. You know what I mean? And I think that if I would have gotten that gig that would have broken me through at an early age, there would have been a part of me that would have a real regret from losing a big sense of privacy. Yeah. And I think that's the one thing you kind of tread on, walk that line in this industry, is where do you really want to fit in that? Do you want to be sort of more the underground guy, or do you want to be the above ground guy, even though making a lot of money, but having absolutely no sense of anything else, privacy, whatever you name it.
Yeah. So more like a session drummer.
Yeah. I mean, again, I would have liked to have seen even just a moment of having Kiss's popularity or something
Right.
like that. But you can't really take that away either. You can't go, okay, I got it, I understand, all right, let's go back to the other life. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there's definitely a side of what I've gone through that I would never trade for the
Yeah.
world.
Good for you. Well,
Yeah.
there's a price to be paid for everything. And I think, the bigger you get, it costs more, anything that's worth the investment of time and perseverance and all those things, the greater the risk, the greater the reward.
Sure.
So along with the other thing I wanted to ask you about too is how did you get the Hannah Montana gig? You did some.
So that was the guitar player, and I'll tell you a little bit of a story about him. The guitar player of the band Migs that I was in, that we were eventually signed, he wrote the theme song for The Bachelor, and he's an LA guy. So we were working with him in San Francisco. We were going back and forth. He was flying up, we were flying down, and he has his own production company and works really just out of his house. And he said, "Hey, I got the job for this new TV show. It stars this new girl, Miley Cyrus. She happens to be Billy Ray Cyrus's daughter. I'm going to be doing all the music for it. I'm not doing the theme song, but I'm doing a lot of like the little bumper music for the commercials, in and out of the commercials. If you come over to my house when you're down in LA next, can you bring your drums, record a bunch of things, and I'll be sort of just working, sort of formulating your drums in these little bumpers." And sure enough, that's what I did. So like it's really just the first season, but the whole first season are just all little snippets that we did together all the way through the show. So that wasn't directly like going to a studio and recording on the spot for the show, but it was all just stuff that was kind of thrown into a pile that worked out through the whole show.
Yeah. So going back to sort of the beginning when we talked about how we met, how did you end up getting aware of or approached, or did you go after becoming the drummer for Marc Martel in the Ultimate Queen experience?
To be honest with you, it was a lucky break. It completely fell in my lap. Mark was hired by the producer of the Queen, of the Ultimate Queen Celebration show, Paul Horton. Paul was scheduling a Queen tribute band to come up from Argentina, I think it was Argentina, on a week-long tour of the Northeast. And a week before, they canceled and they pull out. And Paul was being threatened about being sued because he had committed to this. They put out marketing and all this sort of, they had marketed the gigs, and he called them and said, "I might have to cancel this." And they said, "Well, we're going to sue you." So he scrambled at the last minute, and he somehow stumbled upon Mark's video, and he said, "Oh, we got to get this guy." And through either people they knew, Mark knew, or whatever, they put together this band. They went out and did the first gig, and they were saying that it was like a bunch of guys that looked like they should have been in bow ties reading music doing a Queen gig.
No.
And it was terrible. It was like one of those things. They started to rehearse. They got through the second song, and the bass player went up to Mark and said, we have to cancel this. This is not going to work. And sure enough, the show, they said the spirit of Freddie Mercury came into the theater, and the show went off pretty well. But certainly after that show, they said, "Okay, we got to get rid of these musicians. We need to start calling around." I don't remember how, but somebody got a hold of my very close friend, Angus Clark, who was in my original band called Daredevil Squadron. Angus is the guitar center for the Trans-Siberian Orchestra West. And they said, "Would you like to do this gig?" And he said, "I can't do it full time, but I'm going to give you a couple names." And he gave the name of Tristan Avakian, who Tristan was the original guitar player in Queen Extravaganza with Mark. Gave him my name. And he said, Jason Gianni is one of my really good friends, and I'm sure it'd be okay to play. And sure enough, everybody just sort of came together, and it was like magic. It just sort of kind of happened. And we went through a couple different phases of that band as well. And I actually left in November, but we played together fully for about 2.5 years and toured the world, many places, many times. And Mark is just an absolute supreme talent, unbelievable.
Yeah,
amazing.
I remember watching him early on before I knew about the Queen Ultimate extravaganza, right? Not experience.
Queen,
Um,
ultimate queen experience. Yeah.
Ultimate Queen experience. Celine Dion was lucky.
Celebration. Sorry.
Celebration.
Ultimate queen celebration. Sorry. My God.
We'll get it
My
right
God.
one of these times.
Yeah.
The
Oh yeah, he
Ultimate
sang
Queen
with
celebration.
Celine.
And Celine Dion is literally like crying, and she is,
Yeah.
and it's funny because I did a little research on Mark, and like he was singing like Christian bands, and
Yep.
he's got another, there's another hair band from the 80s that he sings, and he's got that range, and he falls into that sort of you know, he can he can move around a little bit, which is great. He's not just like a one trick pony and like all I can do is sing like Freddie Mercury and that's all I know how to do.
No, he. In fact, we a lot of times in a rehearsal we would just start throwing together a Radiohead song or Mike. What's his name from Faith? Well, I gotta have faith.
Oh, George Michael.
George Michael.
Yeah.
Sorry, my brain is not turned on today. And he would start singing like George Michael and do stuff. It's just like the guy is like a parrot, but he's also such an incredible musician. I mean, he barely ever hits a wrong note. He doesn't get sick a lot. He plays all different instruments. He writes. He's a lyric writer. I mean, he is kind of an anomaly, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
In the world that is the music world nowadays, it's not many people that come along like him.
We've covered so much great stuff, man, and I think there's so much that people will be able to learn and get from this podcast. I hope that's always my hope is that somebody will listen to someone that has been working in the industry like yourself, that's paid their dues, that's done their time, that's been successful and is giving back. I mean, that inspires me to see my friends doing that stuff because that says a lot about who you are, that you're not just someone that's just where's the paycheck. So Jason, there's a lot of things that have happened in the music industry from the time that you started and to the time you are that we're in now. How has the technology changed the way the music industry works or the way that you actually go about producing content?
Just to clarify, unfortunately, we're living in an age where the commercial and movie and show score is often replaced by technology, and the gig for the average drumming acoustic drummer is a lot less than it used to be. I got a lot of jobs early on because the technology thing hadn't really taken off yet. Now you got one guy with a keyboard doing everything. So if somebody really wants to get into jingle work and movie scoring, the first thing I would tell them to get involved is being on this side or the other side of the instrument, which is the computer mixing engineering type of side, because most people are doing it single-handedly these days, or are getting more money or getting more experience from the writing standpoint rather than the playing standpoint. I think there was a time where there was, I remember hearing something about Steve Gadd, daily hopping in a limo and going from studio to studio to studio and just doing a commercial here and a record here and a commercial here and a movie here and doing all that kind of stuff. And that just doesn't exist anymore. So, to get the work and to get the experience, you really have to be on the opposite or the other side of things. You should still have your instrument, your main instrument, but really having the writing and the engineering and the mixing type of thing down. That being said, moving on to the experience or the business side of things, I think the most dangerous thing about the internet is that we're living in a time where everything is so immediate, where we want to learn who that actress was who played Tony Montana's mother in Scarface, and we don't know her name. Let's just look it up real quick. There it is, right there. You get it within 30 seconds, right? We're living in such an immediate, expectant type of culture that we sort of expect that from all walks of life. And the one thing that hasn't disappeared, and we talked about it before, was the interaction between person to person and the forming of relationships. That hasn't changed regardless of technology. Technology has given us a faster route to produce products and produce work. But the idea of creating a relationship with someone, though making a relationship is a little bit easier this day, reaching out to someone over Facebook or over even what we're doing, Zoom or something. But the actual forming of a long-term relationship has not changed. And the one thing I would tell people is to stop thinking on such an immediate basis and understand that part of paying your dues and part of getting better and better and better work and jobs is the time that it takes to form these relationships and the time that it takes to really spend the time and the moments on that journey on the way up.
Before we close off here, do you want to, are there any shout outs that you want to give out to anybody? I know that you got a lot of sponsors and a lot of endorsements.
Yes. Yeah, I'll give some shout outs. Well, first of all, thanks to all my companies who are, one thing, we were talking about relationships before, right? And one thing I think people don't understand about endorsements is the idea that people are so kind of quick to hop on getting endorsements. They think they're going to get stuff for free. They think that they're just going to get all this fame and fortune from getting endorsements. Not true at all. Remember, you endorse a product doesn't endorse you. Okay, or a company does not endorse you. So one part about being really patient and forming the relationships that I have is that now I endorse all the companies that I really legitimately want to endorse. Okay, I'm not having to get out of one because it was like an avenue to another one. And a lot of people do that, and then in turn they make enemies, in the business because they're sort of cutting off other companies. So Yamaha drums, Heisty cymbals, Vic Firth drumsticks, Remo drum heads. Those are my big four. Humes and Berg cases, Kickport, which is a little product that goes in your bass drum that sort of projects the sound. Drum Tax, which is a tacky muffling system for your drums, basically. And Humes and Berg cases, who's an incredible case company. And everybody that I work with not only are just great people, but really are legitimately, in my opinion, the best in the business as far as the company, the way they run the companies, the products, all that type of stuff. And I'm so lucky and I'm so happy that I waited as long as I did and worked as hard as I did to sort of get the relationship with the companies that I really want. So shout out to those guys. Shout out to the Drummers Collective in New York City where I teach. The University of the Arts in Philadelphia. I run their drum division, and I also teach a little bit at New School in New York City. And all my friends and people who might be listening out there.
You were talking about the pandemic and keeping busy, and there's not a lot to do right now. One of the things that I've really enjoyed that you have been doing and have cracked me up, I've shared them all over the place, is you are doing these little side-by-side cartoons with like the Flintstones and the Jetsons where you're playing along and you've got like a kind of symbolic costume on and playing along with that. And I have just found those so completely hysterical and entertaining. It just shows a lot about your creativity, your ingenuity, your great sense of humor.
Right.
Trying to put something out there for people. How did you come up with doing that? Did that just sort of one day you're like, I'm bored, I just want to see if I can play along to the Flintstones theme song?
Well, well, aside from being insane from this quarantine, no, actually, this has been a good time for me because I've been able to flip-flop a lot of my stuff online. So I've been very, very fortunate in being able to do a lot of stuff in my basement. But, like everybody, I've been sort of searching for interesting social media content to do, whether it's some teaching stuff or it's just some video stuff. And it was just another sort of a grouping of videos that I went, okay, this might be interesting to do. But Hanna-Barbera has been known for years of being some of the most difficult music to play along with. Even if you go back to the Bugs Bunny tunes, which is Looney Tunes, if you listen to like xylophone and the orchestral parts when the characters are running around, it's very, very difficult music. And they didn't have the technology then to do cutting and pasting and digital stuff. They had to do a lot of that stuff live. So if you go back and listen to the theme songs for Fred Flintstone, the Flintstones, the Jetson, the next one I'm going to do is McGilla Gorilla. This kind of stuff. It's a big band and it's fast tempos and it's one of the things that's difficult about them is they weren't done digitally to a perfect metronome. So the music does a little bit of this. Yeah. So there's a little lope to it. And I've actually had to take my computer and actually by hand put in a click track because you can't just stick a metronome to that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was kind of a whole process of, okay, let me watch the video on YouTube. Let me record a hand click track. Let me record to that click track. Let me put it over the top and make sure everything lines up. Okay, that didn't work as well. Let me go back and do it again. You know, it was kind of
Hit or
you're
miss.
sort of pushing it back and forth a couple times. Yeah. And I don't remember who it was, but I did see, I had spoken to people for many years about the complexity of having a Flintstones big band chart where their big band in college or something played it, or I might have even seen someone do it. So it's just something I always wanted to do. So I started with the Flintstones, and then somebody mentioned the Jetsons, and I went, yeah, that's another one. And that was even harder. That's a very difficult one. And yeah, they came out ridiculous and good at the same time.
They were so much fun, man. I'm so glad that they were just like, it made my day. I'm like, you know, he gets it. It's like people don't need to hear about the politics and complaining about this or that and the other thing. We need to be laughing right now and entertainment. And I think that the creative people are the ones that are saving the world right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
who knew that? I'm sure Netflix's sales are off the charts right now because people are like, what are we going to do? What are we going to watch?
yeah.
And I think it's up to like I said, the creatives are the ones that are going to survive through this because we're finding new ways to navigate our industries.
Yeah.
Just like you're doing that. I started this podcast. I've been doing a lot of YouTube videos for the sponsors that I have, and also just to try to help other people learn photography and maybe learn some different
Cool.
techniques that they wouldn't learn because I've been doing this for like 35 years and I have
Yeah,
a lot of things that I've
lot to
learned from
offer.
amazing
Mhm.
people and thankful to my mentors. And I just want to share that with other people so they can, get a good start and go enjoy themselves and go follow their dreams. So
More power to you,
anyway,
man. It's great. Yeah.
yeah. So Jason, thanks again for being with us today. And thank you for everyone that has tuned in. I know this probably ran a little bit longer than some of my other podcasts, but when there's great content, I believe in just let people have it all and they can make their decision whether they want to watch the whole thing or just little sections of it. But thanks again to Jason. And we're going to put his information at the tail end of this podcast so that you can follow him on social medias, Instagram, his website, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Stay tuned for more. And thanks again, Jason.